bringing to you our third video in this Black History Month series. I'm Colin, and I have the privilege of serving as one of the elders at Christ our King. And I've been enjoying these videos, you all. I've been enjoying making them for you, and I trust that you all find them interesting and insightful and inspiring. And ultimately, how these stories of success, particularly for people of African descent, points us to a greater reality of God's grace and God's love and God's mercy. Today, you all, we're going to learn about a man by the name of Robert Smalls. A story, you all, that I've heard for some time, but a story that I had to do some digging to learn a little bit more about. And so come with me, you all, as we journey through this incredible story of Robert Smalls. The year is 1861, and in Charleston, South Carolina, we find this waterfront city having a history of operating the largest slave port in North America at that time. It's so large, you all, that it's estimated that between the years 1783 and 1807, that up to 100,000 enslaved Africans arrived at that port. In 1808, there was an act of Congress that outlawed the importation of enslaved Africans. However, that then ushered into existence a domestic slave trading system, particularly in the Charleston area, which is known as Low Country. Enslaved Africans were used to work on cotton and sugar plantations, but particularly in Charleston, right, being a waterfront city, some of those enslaved Africans worked on ships that were docked in the harbor. And it's in that reality, in this space, where we meet Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was born in 1839 in Beaufort, South Carolina. His mother, Lydia Polite, was enslaved, and she was forced to work both in the fields as well as the house. A man by the name of Henry McKee owned the plantation that Robert was born on, and Henry McKee favored Robert more than others, and this concerned Lydia, because Lydia did not want Robert to be in some ways shielded from or protected from the reality of suffering on that plantation. And so, in an interesting act, Lydia requested that Robert be made to work in the fields, and that Robert be made to witness the brutal beatings and punishment that the enslaved endured, all because Lydia did not want her son to become numb or insensitive to the suffering of his people. And so at the age of 12, we find Robert being sent to work in Charleston, where he would earn $16 a week, and a lot of money for people at that time. But as was common in this cultural context in the life of the enslaved, Robert was only permitted to keep $1 out of that $16 that he earned. The remaining $15 was paid to Henry McKee, the plantation owner. Several years later, Robert's love of the ocean led him to working as a longshoreman and eventually as a wheelman, which is similar to being a captain, but in that time, enslaved Africans could not be referred to as captains. But nevertheless, that is the work that Robert was doing as a wheelman. In 1856, he married Hannah Jones, who was an enslaved woman who worked as a hotel maid in Charleston. And after getting married, the two of them began to build a family. Now, as you can imagine, for any man who's leading a family that is enslaved, Robert wanted more for himself. Robert wanted more for his wife. Robert wanted more for his children. And so he intended to purchase the freedom of his family. Now remember, at age 12, Robert was only earning $1 because the remaining $15 was stolen from him. But think of this, you all. At that time, to purchase freedom, the cost was about $800. In his work as a sailor, Robert was only able to save up to about $100. And so we find him being $700 short of what he needed to purchase his family's freedom. But it was in 1861 that the future of Robert's family would change forever. As a sailor with incredible knowledge of the Charleston Harbor, Robert was assigned to navigate the CSS Planter. The CSS Planter, you all, was a Confederate military ship. At this time in history, the Civil War had begun, and in the Charleston Harbor was the Battle of Fort Sumter. As a wheelman of the CSS Planter, Robert's job was to survey waterways, to lay mines, and then to also deliver messages, and to deliver soldiers, and to deliver supplies. Robert was given a lot of responsibility because of his abilities as a sailor. Sometime around April of 1862, Robert began to develop an escape plan for his family. An escape plan that would require the use of, guess what, y'all? A ship. Robert wasn't the only enslaved person on the ship, so there were others who needed to play a role. And on the evening of May 12th, 1862, the CSS Planter docked for the night, and the 3 Confederate officers who were assigned to the ship left to go spend the night ashore. Before the officers left, though, Robert requested family visitation for the enslaved sailors. This request was approved, however, the families had to leave before curfew. Imagine being an adult given a curfew. Once their families arrived, Robert and his team then revealed their plans to take a ship and to escape to freedom. Now, after leaving the ship, some of the enslaved crew, pretended to escort the families back to their homes. But what they ended up doing was taking the families and hiding them into another ship until it was time to make the great escape. And then around 3 a.m. on May 13th, Robert and 7 enslaved sailors made their move. Robert, he put on a captain's uniform, and he took a straw hat that looked just like the ones that the captain would wear, and he put on that straw hat. And so Robert, in this captain's uniform and wearing this straw hat, he went on deck and he even imitated the mannerisms of the ship's captain. Robert was determined to get freedom for his family and for the family of his crew. In addition to imitating the captain, he even raised 2 flags on the ship. He raised a Confederate flag, then he raised the flag for South Carolina. And then in this daring escape plan, Robert took the CSS Planter, sailed it to the location of where the families were hiding, brought the families on board the ship, sailed past 5 Confederate forts, y'all, and then eventually sailed right past, guess what? Fort Sumter itself. Once passing Fort Sumter, Robert took down both the flags, the Confederate flag and the South Carolina flag, and he raised a white flag. Why would he do this? Because Robert, as a sailman, had knowledge of the harbor, and he knew that further out to sea, there was a Union military ship docked close to the Charleston Harbor. Robert, he raises the white flag as they began to approach this ship, which is a flag of surrender. Robert made contact with the ship and the ship's captain, and then finally, their families got their freedom. All of this, you all, by the time Robert was only 23 years old. After this daring escape, Robert became somewhat of a hero, you all, in the North. Northern newspapers and magazines told the story of this great escape. And because he took the CSS Planter, and delivered it to the hands of the Union military, you all, the U.S. Congress passed a bill that awarded Robert and his crew prize money for giving the planter to the Union military. Robert's cut of the prize money was about $1,500. And in today's economy, that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but in the 1860s, that $1,500 was the equivalent of what would be $43,000 today. A lot of money. Robert would go on to serve in both the Navy and the Army. He opened a business in his hometown of Beaufort, South Carolina, one that would serve the needs of the now freedmen. And he would also go on to work to make free education available to all children living in South Carolina. And then in 1868, Robert was elected to the South Carolina House of Representatives. And in 1874, he served 2 terms in the United States House of Representatives. Christ our King, another incredible story of Black brilliance and Black success. Please join me in celebrating the life and the accomplishments of the brave, the determined, the brilliant Mr. Robert Smalls. Well, Christ our King, this is video 3. We got one more to go. I'll see you soon. Grace and